Hello and welcome to AcroTales, a regular podcast that explores the fascinating world of acromegaly. My name's Dan Jeffries and I was diagnosed with acromegaly in 2007. And in each episode of AcroTales, I'll be talking to fellow acromegalics from around the world about their journey with this unique condition. It's episode 21 and I'm really pleased to introduce Natalie from Buckinghamshire in the UK. Now, Natalie is 43 and as of today has not actually had an official diagnosis for acromegaly. So this is going to, I think, make for a really interesting episode. Natalie, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Dan. Oh, it's lovely to be here.
Awesome. Great to have you. So, possibly the first episode we've done where I've got someone on the call that doesn't officially have acromegaly, but perhaps has a lot of the signs and the symptoms. So do you want to just talk us through your journey as to how you've gotten here?
Yeah, so looking back, I think even as a teenager, I had a lot of hormonal issues. I have suffered from fatigue pretty much for as long as I can remember. And then it got to about probably 2013 and I realised things, I just wasn't feeling myself, really was not feeling myself. So I started going to my GP. I'm very fortunate. My GP has always been incredible and realised that, things weren't quite right. So we did lots of blood tests. They were all fine. And then he agreed that things weren't right. So he then started sending me off to multiple different specialities. One of the big issues I have always had is my joints. Even as a teenager, I can remember my joints just feeling horrendous. Stiffness, like trying to get up off the floor. I'd have to have a table or something to help myself get up, which is, that's ridiculous when you're in your 20s and 30s. No, it's not. It's not normal at all in your 20s and your 30s. So my joints have always been a big issue. So I saw, rheumatology, I saw neurology because I've always suffered from headaches and migraines. I saw multiple. I remember when I was 30, I must have been 31 or 32, and it was suggested it could be early menopause. And I was like, oh my goodness, that was a little bit of a shock to the system.
Yeah,
but again, everything was covered. Everyone was saying to me, no, not still to do with us. We'll send you back to your GP. And then I'm trying to think when it was. I think it must have been 2016. My GP did another blood test and my cortisol was slightly out. So I think it was clutching at straws. He said, I'll send you off to endocrinology. Well, why not?
Okay.
You've been everywhere else. Literally. He was like, you've been everywhere else. Let's send you off to endocrinology. So I went off to them. They obviously ran all the bloods. And I then had an appointment in January 2017 at my local hospital and was told I had elevated IGF-1. And the word acromegaly was then first mentioned to me. Okay. And I was, as everyone goes, I went, what? I was like, what's that?
What?
Yeah. And my thoughts were, I thought I'm going to go in and they're going to say either adrenal fatigue, fibromyalgia, which had been mentioned several times to me in the past by others. And I think like some people at the beginning, I kept calling it, how did I pronounce it? Acromyalgia.
Okay.
I was combining the two.
Right.
And so when he mentioned acromegaly, I was a bit like, what's that? And he was an endocrinologist at my local hospital. He told me I had to get him to spell the word out for me. He wrote it down on a piece of paper and I asked him a few questions. And I wrote down, and I was looking for the piece of paper the other day actually, because I saw it a few months ago, so I know I still have it here somewhere. And he'd said to me that only 5% of people with elevated IGF-1 have acromegaly. So I went, 5%, I'm not even worrying about that. I was like, okay, it'll be another specialist I'll be off to. Yeah. And literally I thought, here we go, it's fine. I'll be off. My GP will send me off somewhere else potentially in the future. So I thought I'm not even going to worry about it. But I'd got him to write the word down for me. And because it was an early morning appointment, so just in case I'd fasted, just in case he wanted to do any further bloods. So I thought I really need a coffee. So I went down to the cafeteria in the hospital, and it was quite busy because it was sort of probably about 9:30. So there was lots of patients, lots of visitors. Got myself a coffee, got myself something to eat, sat down, and I thought, right, I need to look this up. So I thought, as I'd been through this multiple times, I'd always known you don't Google. What I had learned, and a friend of mine from years ago who was a GP, he said, if you need to, go on the NHS website. So go on the NHS website and look it up, because you know you're not going to be reading a load of nonsense.
Trusted source.
Yeah, absolutely. So I sat there in the cafeteria, typed in NHS acromegaly, and my face just went like this. And the doctor, the endocrinologist, he hadn't mentioned tumour. He hadn't mentioned pituitary. He hadn't mentioned anything. And I think the fact that he said 5%, I just went, oh, I'm not even worrying about that. It's fine. It'll be, that's not going to be for me. That's not going to be me. And I literally had a meltdown in the cafeteria.
Okay. Quick way to find out.
Yeah, it was a bit of a shock. And it also contradicted the 5% that he'd said, because it basically was saying an elevated IGF-1 is a very strong indication, or words to that effect, is a very strong indication of acromegaly. So, and he'd written down my numbers. So my range at the time, because obviously as your age goes up, your range changes slightly. But I do remember my range at that time, I think it was something like 6 to like 31 or something along those lines. And my IGF-1 was 51.
Okay.
So it wasn't like 1 or 2 out. It was, it was quite a bit out. Not massively out, but it was definitely elevated. So I had a chat with him a few days later. I think I pretty much harassed his secretary because I wanted answers. Yeah, I wanted answers. And by that point, I had the way I am with things like this, I need answers, and I research like mad. So I basically read papers. I had tracked down within a few days, I'd found our acromegaly support group. I was chatting to people like yourself and others in the group. And I realized very, very quickly, if you have acromegaly, you need to be with an acromegaly specialist, not I want to say general endocrinologist, because a lot of them might be dealing purely with diabetes. They might not be treating acromegaly patients.
You need someone that's done the surgery, seen hundreds of patients.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my first questions to him was, how many acromegaly patients did he have? And he wouldn't give me an answer. He just said a few. And I was like, well, what do you mean by a few? 5? Because I didn't want to offend the guy. No. In my mind, I just kept thinking, I'm not going to be one of your guinea pigs.
No. And it's your health at the end of the day. I mean,
100%. And from all the reading I'd been doing, I knew I needed a good team. If this is the road I was going to be going down, I needed a good team. So I spoke to my GP again, and I said, I don't have confidence in being a patient at my local hospital with their endocrinology team, because I said, I don't think they have the experience of working with acromegaly patients. And I said, I need to go somewhere that's good. And he was totally on board with this. My GP was. So he then sent me to another hospital. They then did the OGTT. And this is where things got a bit complicated, because the OGTT, so the oral glucose tolerance test, that came back in range. So they then said, it's not acromegaly. They said you need to have elevated IGF-1 and you're out of range OGTT. So they said it's not acromegaly. Now, all the research I had done, it pretty much said that if it's not acromegaly, it's down to malnutrition or pregnancy. And there was a few other ones as well. And I thought, well, none of those apply to me. So I had an MRI, and we found the adenoma.
Right.
So then I was like, okay, 2 out of 3.
Yeah, the adenoma has got to be a pretty big indicator, I would have thought.
Yeah. And I was very fortunate. It was very, very tiny. It was 2 millimeters. But at the same time, my brain was going down the route of, okay, 2 millimeters is tiny, but the pituitary is only 10 millimeters. So it's 20% the size. So that kind of plays a little bit on your mind, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But they just kept saying to me, no, because you don't look like you have acromegaly. You haven't got facial changes and your OGTT is fine. So it's not acromegaly. They were saying it's impossible. So again, I went back to my GP and I said, I'm still not happy. And he agreed with me. He was absolutely phenomenal, my GP was. He totally agreed with me. I'd been chatting with a lot of people in our support group, and I was like, please help me find the best endocrinologist for acromegaly. And that's when Nikki was talked about. And I said to my GP, that's who I want to go and see. So he then referred me up to Birmingham.
Birmingham, yeah.
Yeah. So he referred me up to Birmingham, which was life-changing for me because Nikki, again, we're in the same position, but she was curious to know more. And she said to me, we will keep monitoring you and we will keep this going. We're not going to just say to you, goodbye, this is impossible.
Yeah. When was that? When did you go and first see her?
So actually, you can probably help me out with this because I should know the dates here. When was our acromegaly meetup in Birmingham? Was that 2018, I think?
No, 2017.
2017, okay. So I had first been up to see Nikki. I'd met Nikki a couple of months before that. And I then got, because you'd put out this amazing acromegaly meetup that you'd arranged. And I was a bit like imposter syndrome. I was like, oh, I don't think I should go because I'm not officially acromegaly. I don't officially have acromegaly diagnosis. And so I was a bit like, oh, I'm not sure. And then the date for my MRI came through. I don't know if you remember this. The date for my MRI came through and it was the same day as the meetup. And I just went, well, that's a sign. I'll go. And so I came to the meetup, which was incredible because I got to meet all of you, which was just phenomenal.
And Nikki was there, wasn't she? I think.
Yeah, Nikki was there, and so it was amazing hearing her talk. And obviously, I'd had my first consult with her. So yeah, it was incredible. And then later on in the day, I left slightly early, and I was like, I'm going upstairs for my MRI now. So that was it was a lovely coincidence, that was. So that was 2017 then.
Yeah, I might be wrong. It might have been 2019 or 2018. I can't quite remember.
Now, 2019 was Manchester. I remember that one.
Yes. Okay.
2019.
So it may have been. I think 2018 was the first one then. Okay. Yeah. So that was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing you still don't have an answer?
No.
Okay.
It's still the same. But yeah, so my last MRI was, I'll do another MRI this year. My last MRI, the tumour was stable, I guess. So the adenoma had stayed the same size. My IGF-1, so again, my GPs are phenomenal. And rather than having to go up to Birmingham purely for blood tests, my GPs do them for me. So my IGF-1 has always stayed elevated. Nikki has been amazing because what she did initially is with my bloods, she sent them off to every single lab in the country just to see if it was a lab, and they all came back elevated. And one of my biggest curiosities has always been, and I think this is what has kept me going for looking for answers, is what I've always asked the question, what's the prevalence of somebody having IGF-1 elevated, an adenoma, and it not being acromegaly?
Yes.
And I can't find an answer to that. And I asked Nikki that, and she was very, very honest with me. She's like my guardian angel, Nikki is. She was very honest with me. She said, that's the $1 million question. We just don't know.
No. And because, I'm guessing, as with all rare conditions, even if it's never happened before, it's not impossible that it's happened to you. And
yeah, absolutely.
And that's the difficulty for them, isn't it? So the tumour hasn't grown anymore?
No,
I'm guessing. Have you
so
had?
my
Sorry, I was gonna say you've had
latest
previous MRIs since then.
yeah, so I've had I think I've had three. I think I've had three for
Okay.
the on the pituitary. So I'm fairly certain I'm due another one later this year. So we'll see where that one goes. So we'll see what that one shows. And then I've got another bloods later next month, and that will be testing IGF-1 and growth hormone, and we'll just see what that shows.
Okay, and you're not on any medication then, I'm guessing.
No, no. That was one question I did have years ago, was could we do a trial of medication to see if it lowered my IGF-1? And, and I fully understand the medication for acromegaly is extortionately expensive. So I understand why the answer was no on the NHS for that. I understand that. And it's like Nikki has always said to me, at the moment, because the adenoma is so small, it's not causing an impact on my vision. It's not pressing on anything, like your carotid artery or, anything like that. It's not causing issues there yet. And she said, this could be a non-functioning pituitary tumour. And I'm with her on that. It could be. And it could be that my IGF-1 is naturally high. But to me, the two of them together, it's an uncomfortable coincidence.
I guess so. I guess the big question is, though, on a day-to-day basis, do you feel okay? I mean, can you lead a inverted commas normal life? I appreciate the rheumatism and the joint pain may still be an issue, but generally, do you feel well?
So that's a really interesting question, because a lot of it for me is up here. It's the choices that we make and what we focus on. So
Here,
I
just for
know.
those listening on the podcast, up here is in the head.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Which Natalie has just pointed at. I think we just need to make that clear.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, the first couple of years of finding out about it, I went down a very, very dangerous emotional journey. I think is the only way of describing it. I don't feel, going back to your question, I know my energy levels are not right. I do have to really watch my energy levels. I get really, really tired, and brain fog some days can be horrendous. My joints are not great. I've been seeing an osteopath for a while now, and even he's like, this is not quite normal. No. In a nice way. So yeah, it's interesting. Nikki phrased it once to me, and I thought she's kind of hit the nail on the head. And she said, when you live a certain way, so you live with, and this could be relevant to anybody with any condition, like physical condition. When you've lived with it for so long, it becomes your normal. So you almost kind of forget what it would feel like if you didn't have that. So
I totally get that.
Yeah, it was a really interesting perspective. It was it was a really interesting perspective, that was.
And I guess those who live with chronic pain and, throughout their lives, it just becomes a part of your normality, doesn't it? I mean, this is not, I can't compare apples with oranges, but, I have a permanently sore back. And I've tried all manner of treatments, and my lower lumbar is quite painful, and I think that might be a slight side effect of the acromegaly. But what can you do about it? And you kind of have to resign yourself sometimes. You try and do everything you can to manage it, but to cure it is difficult.
Yeah.
And so there is a bit of resignation, I think, and then you just have to live your best life with what you've got.
Totally. And it's a choice. It's absolutely a choice for us. And this is one thing I realised in, so probably 2018, 2019 were emotionally incredibly tough years for me, because it was the unknown, and it was so scary, the unknown of, because also we do hear, elevated IGF-1 that's not treated, the internal damage that can do can be quite horrific. Like the heart, at the internal organs, and that really scared me. That really scared me. And I know I had some emotional trauma from some previous surgeries that I've had that obviously not related in any way. But I knew I had some emotional trauma from those. So the thought of at any point I could be told, yes, actually it is acromegaly, and now we're going to be doing, surgery to remove this tumour, that terrified me. That absolutely terrified me, that did. Because I felt like I couldn't go, okay, it's happening in 2 months' time. I can spend 2 months preparing myself and then hopefully it will be done. It was a case, well, it could be now, it could be in a year's time. And I was terrified to make any plans.
Yeah, I do get that. It's that sense of the unknown, isn't it? And also, I think when you have an active brain, that can be your worst enemy sometimes as well, where it's
yeah.
I think the phrase is doom forecasting, or you're just thinking too far ahead, and then you stop living the sort of, your day-to-day life.
Yeah, totally.
And things are affecting you that actually you don't actually know if they will affect you or not. And it's very
absolutely
difficult.
Yeah, it really is. And it was also for me, I kept going down the route of, if the longer we leave this, potentially, and I understand where Nikki was coming from, where she was saying at the moment we don't want to do this, remove the tumour, because it might be non-functioning and we could do more damage. The risks of further damage are there. So unless we have to remove it, we're not going to. And I was on board with that, totally. And also the thought of, I was like, phew, I get out of surgery. So at that point, so I was on board with that. But at the same time, it's like it's a total balancing act, because at the same time, my mind was going, okay, if we leave it and it gets bigger and it then causes damage, then where does that leave me?
It's very, very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you leave something as it is because it's doing no damage at present, but who's to say it won't do that in the future? I think it's until you live with it, it's really hard to know. And I guess it's just a perspective on life. And I think, we were chatting about this beforehand. I think it would be fair to say you've been reticent to sort of share your experience in the past, but recently you feel that you're in a place where you can do that. What do you think has changed for you that means that you're here now telling your story on AcroTales?
So it kind of started, so right from the beginning, when obviously I heard all of your stories and everything that you guys were going through, and the medication, the treatments, the radiotherapy, the surgeries and all this, and it literally just broke me because I thought the awareness is not out there. So obviously we have Acromegaly Awareness Day on November the 1st. So I love being creative. So I got on Canva and I designed this poster, and I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to share it. And if it helps raise awareness in some way or other, then that's amazing. But then at the same time, I was like, okay, I need to have a cover story as to I need to have a little bit of a cover story here as to why I'm doing this. For sort of like people that know me. So I just was saying, and it is true. I was saying, some very close friends and some very lovely friends of mine have this condition, and I want to do my part to raise awareness. So I've been sharing that post.
Without actually saying, and I might have this too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was, gosh, I can't remember. I mean, gosh, I've been doing that poster. Maybe I should do a new one for us. I think that's
great. And just to say, we'll share that on the AcroTales website. So if people haven't seen it, they can go and have a look at it.
Yeah, and I think I first did that in 2017, possibly, maybe 2018. And then 2 years ago, so just going back a little bit more to your question, about 20 years ago, I started reading and hearing about NLP, so neuro-linguistic programming. And I've always been really fascinated with it, really, really fascinated with it. And then and it felt dangerous to me, the journey that I was going down, the
Could you maybe
mindset.
just give a very brief explanation of what NLP is for those listening that may not know?
Yeah, so I like to think of it, the easiest way is the way your brain is programmed at an unconscious level. So consciously, you think about certain things, don't you? And you think, oh, okay, I'm going to phone a friend. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. But we also have a level of unconscious activities that we do where we're totally unaware of it. We just do it. It just happens.
Yeah.
And it's the way that our brains are programmed. So from a everything up here in our brains that's happening, linguistic is our internal language. And then the programming is the way we unconsciously have these programs built within our own minds and the own language that we use to ourselves. So, and if you can learn to speak a certain way to yourself, you can learn to speak another way to yourself, but you have to change it at an unconscious level.
Okay.
So I knew, from the little I knew about NLP, I knew that was an area I wanted to, and I needed to investigate further. So I then, nearly 2 years ago, I decided to do my practitioner and my coach certifications. So I did those predominantly for myself. I'm also self-employed as a dog trainer, so I knew it would help me with my clients as well, and it has done, which is lovely. So it's lovely to be able to share that with them. But more so, it's how it helped me, and it totally transformed the way my mind, basically the journey my mind went on. It totally transformed it for me. So yeah,
in terms of your acknowledgement of this condition and the complexity of, have I got it, have I not got it, all of the things that whirl around your head thinking about these things.
Yeah, totally.
That's settled. Is that how you would see it?
Yeah, absolutely. It was. I also was able to deal with the emotional trauma from past surgeries, so I now feel, I'm not saying if I get a diagnosis and I'm told I need surgery, I won't be going into the hospital singing, no. But I will be in a much, much better headspace, 100%. And I feel calmer about it. I feel much calmer about it. Interestingly, I haven't seen Nikki since before the pandemic. We've had phone consultations, which has been fine. So it will be interesting to see if I were to have an in-person with her, can I actually sit in front of her and not cry my eyes out? That will be interesting.
It sounds to me, Nat, like you've got that you're in a good place and an acceptance of what's going on. It's, in rare disease, we always talk about the diagnostic odyssey, and that's the journey that you go on to get an answer to what is happening to you. And that can take years and years and years. I think on average it's 6 years. Yeah. And there's a lot of fighting and a lot of being your own advocate. And I can't really imagine the complexity of going on that journey and still not coming out with an answer, or there being a possible answer. You kind of know what it is, but the science can't prove it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I mean, obviously I'm not a medical professional in any way. I have done an awful lot of research and reading on acromegaly. And because acromegaly, like you say, I mean, we're 6 years, and we know from just chatting with so many people in our small community, so many people look back and they go, oh, it was there 20 years ago. It was there 10 years ago. It takes so long for the majority of people to get diagnosed. Yeah. So very rarely are people diagnosed in the early stages. It's so, so rare. And obviously the number one thing that I quite often get told by the medical professional in general is you don't look like you have acromegaly. So because your growth hormone is currently in range, is fine, you don't look like, clinically, you don't look like you have acromegaly, so we can't be certain. And I'm like, well, my thoughts is could I be in the very, very early stages? And we know it's, for the majority of people, it's very slow progressing. So my thoughts are, okay, maybe in 5-10 years time, it will be there.
Yeah.
But then we also know through our community that the one wish that nearly every single person has is they wish they'd been diagnosed earlier.
But I guess on the plus side, you're prepared for it.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
you know, people wish they'd been diagnosed earlier, but they would never have heard of acromegaly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that, you know, that's, you know, it's wonderful looking back in hindsight.
Yes.
But if you know, you can't self-diagnose something that you don't know about.
No,
And I think
absolutely not.
And I think you're in a, I'm not going to use the word privileged position, but I guess you're in a unique position that you are so aware of this and so conscious of this situation that if you start to notice a marked change, or then you will be on it like Gromit, and you will be
totally. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's interesting because I you know, one of the areas that I went down, and in fact, actually, I started this before I went to endocrinology because I was just feeling so awful, is I was like, I need to help myself. You know, what can I do to help myself? Because at the moment, the medical world is not able to help me. So things like I cut out refined sugar. And that made a massive difference, massive, like the mind-body connection. You know, I know that if I eat refined sugar, the next day, my body, I feel like I can't move my body. You know, then of course, if your body feels like that, up here in your mind, it can be really hard to feel positive. You know, if your body's feeling rubbish, it's really hard to keep.
And that's where we've got to be strong and make the changes and improvements that we can.
Yeah.
In our day-to-day lives to just sort of help with sort of general existence and general day-to-day living. But it's hard. For some people, that's a real struggle, and for others, it's not too bad.
Yeah, it is totally, and it breaks my heart when, you know, within our community, when I see people that are really, really struggling, and you just want to reach out and you want to wave a magic wand for them. You really do, because you can see that. I look at some of them and at some people and I just think, gosh, they are 10 times they're like 10 times worse emotionally than I think I was in 2018, 2019. And I know how bad that was. And I just think you just want to wrap them up and help them. And it's so hard. And, you know, it just breaks my heart for everybody. You know, and again, it's the awareness. You know, it's with so many other, you know, medical conditions that aren't necessarily visible. You know, we know that's a big thing for a lot of people, where, you know, you're not walking around with a big plaster cast on your leg, so people look at you and go, well, what's the matter? You don't look X, Y, Z.
It's really difficult.
Yeah.
Look, Natalie, it's been absolutely fascinating chatting through this. And I know this has been a big thing for you to find the right time to do it. So I'm hugely grateful for you telling your story. It's a unique one, because I know people listen back to these for advice and guidance, maybe on acromegaly, but I still think your approach and your positive outlook on this, and your determination to try and find an answer in a world that can't give you an answer yet, is really inspiring. So, you know, I am no person to give advice, but I would always say, don't let this be what defines you.
Yes, 100%.
100%. Put it on the back burner as much as you can, and train your dogs and live your life and enjoy the weather, and don't let this be something that, you know, it casts a huge grey cloud over you.
Yeah,
as you said, there are
right.
people in and there are people in much worse situations that do have to live with it and can still live a fulfilling and enjoyable life. So
yeah, absolutely. And I know when I look back at myself now, if I compare myself now to, say, 2018, I'm a different person. I'm a totally different person. And, you know, whereas it used to consume nearly every waking minute of my life, I probably sometimes go a couple of days without it really, you know, it's not in the forefront of my mind anymore. It's there, I'm aware of it, and I'm more aware of looking after myself.
Yeah.
You know, that's the main thing.
Quite right. And I've always said this, you know, some people go, oh, I'm not doing much advocacy recently. It's like, great.
Yeah.
You don't have to, you know, you're go and live. And when you feel like you want to give back, then do it. But, you know, it's a balance, but yeah, really fascinating, Nat. So thank you so much for joining us on AcroTales and sharing your story.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Dan. It was it's been nice. It feels right as well. It feels right now to sort of talk about it a bit more openly.
Fantastic. And if you found Natalie's story interesting and want to hear other AcroTales, head over to acrotales.com, where you can find the ever-expanding library of interviews. And of course, you can subscribe to the podcast to receive the latest updates. Go to iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time for another AcroTale.